Welcome to the Mobile Ecosystem Forum podcast, Perspectives in Mobile. The podcast where we look into the most pressing issues, trends, and innovation shaping the mobile landscape today. In this special series, we look at how companies are managing change in the digital era. This series is supported by Netnumber.
Hello and welcome to Perspective, the podcast from a Mobile Ecosystem Forum that looks at some of the people that make the different things that we look at it, the big topics, the big debates, the big discussions, sometimes the big companies that we go back and use and reflect on. But today we have a special new series that starts with the help of Netnumber. The company, as you know, that helps the information services for the numbers and more in the industry of telecommunications. They themselves reflecting at the pace of change, the pace of transformation that this industry is going forward, and wanted to initiate a bit of a debate. And thanks for the number to support us all throughout, not just in this podcast. And to introduce us to one of a person that has devoted his life to these discussions. Craig Dowden, PhD. Craig is a best-selling author, coach, podcaster. I could go on for much longer. But instead of that, and let me just welcome. Hi, Craig. Welcome to Perspective.
Hi, Dario. Thanks so much for the invite. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Well, so are we. This is one of those topics which is fundamental. It's how this industry, any industry, manages itself, its people, in the end. We refer to all of the technologies that we have. We fall in love with technologies. But it's the people that make the difference, isn't it? And so let me ask you directly back to the question of perspectives. You have matured in over 25 years of work, as we say. Your view on what makes for transformations, what is required by today's leaders that embark on something like that, and how does it look?
Well, and thank you for that question. I think what's really interesting about leadership is the qualities that make a great leader have been consistent across time. What I think is happening is we're seeing an amplification of those core qualities. And so things like COVID, things like the technological shifts that you just talked about, Dario, have been vitally important. And what it's done is accelerated that. So now when you look at the conversation around the world, top thought leaders, what's part of the conversation? It's emotions, it's empathy, it's humility. And these are things that if you go back maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, weren't really part of the dialogue around leadership and wellness and organizational success. And so now what I think is happening is that those qualities are just becoming more and more important. And in the past, even though they were important, they just weren't talked about as much. And now they are true game changers. It's very difficult to see a world where a leader, an individual, can be as successful as they could be without embracing those qualities.
So if you reflect back maybe a few decades ago, I guess, probably the 70s, the 80s, we looked at some of those macho personifications of the leader, the CEO, the Superman that would make everything changed by its own interactions. Do leaders today already have attuned more to the softer side? As things improve? What would you say? Where are we in the scale of understanding and showing empathy with people?
Well, I think in the past, certainly command and control, I mean, the classic, right? Exactly as you're talking about, very hierarchical, top down, authoritative, do as I say. It's much more prevalent. Yet today, I had the pleasure of hosting Stephen M.R. Covey on my podcast, and he talked about enlightened command and control. So a little better, yet we're still not where we need to be. What the good news is that empathy, humility, emotions, they're more a part of the conversation now. You're seeing leading publications talk about it. You're seeing those discussions at top conferences and books coming out written on these subjects. So we are moving in that direction. Yet if you look at the engagement data, if you look at the burnout data, if you look at well-being, we still have a way to go. And I think one of the big challenges for leaders today is it's much more complex to lead in today's environment than it was 10, 15, even 5 years ago. It's just extraordinary. So managing ourselves, mastering ourselves, if you will, has become an even more vitally important challenge because of all the different pressure people are under, and people leaders in particular, in their roles.
Well, given your experience and your reflection for the last 25 years, do you think that there is a secret recipe out there? Have we got, magic formula? What needs to happen right now?
Well, I think yes and no. Maybe I'll fall back on my psychology training and say yes and no. I think the equation or the variables in the equation are available to us. I think they're really critical. Yet at the same time, situational leadership is a highly regarded and highly powerful model whereby, well, it's necessary to adjust our style to the situation. What do you hear in conversations? What qualities the leaders need to possess? Agile, adaptable. That's when you looked at LinkedIn surveys and other things, and they say, an agile organization, an agile executive. So I think that's where we have to have the ability to understand what does the situation require of us, and what do the people around us require of us. And on my side, this is where I would say we are quite closer to the answer. It's, well, we have to look inward before we can lead outward. If we can't lead ourselves, it's very challenging to lead others. And so that focus on self-awareness, humility, and empathy, they're vitally important in order for us to be able to make significant gains.
If we talk about today leaders, and let's give them some good points, so some good examples, some good case studies. What are they doing right?
Well, I think in some cases, and this is really almost executive specific, you've seen in some circumstances people apologize effectively so that they take ownership for when they make a misstep. You've seen other cases where they double down on their mistakes and the things that they've done and really dismissed other people. You'll see other executives whereby they're quite transparent about the challenges that they're facing. They're transparent about who they are and what they value. And so that focus on authenticity has also come to the forefront. And so that no matter what the particular individual says or does, you get a really good sense of who they are at their core. And so I feel like that's becoming much more a part of the conversation. And there's a recognition that people bring your whole selves to work, if you will. And so that focus on wellness and wanting to ensure that we're creating safe spaces for our team members, our employees. So those topics, those themes are coming to the forefront, and you can see some organizations are doing a great job in that.
I love these as working in a small team. You probably don't have such a structure, but nevertheless, the idea of authenticity seems to be a very strong one. And it's not just in leadership, it's everything we want. We want to now have a relationship with. Is there an element of privacy or a certain step where we should be made a trade-off? One example could be a medical situation or something where people are not ready, even to their own family, to discuss and share elements of that. So where do you think that we should put a little demarcation line, if anywhere?
No, I think it's a fantastic question. And these are all personal decisions as well, right? When it comes to, so how much am I going to divulge about my own personal situation, my own circumstances? And that is, to me, once again, an intentional decision. So recognizing what am I going to divulge to whom and how? These are all vitally important questions to ask ourselves. So rather than just not thinking about it, because as an example, a great question we can ask ourselves is, so let's say I have a particular personal issue that's happening health wise. Perhaps I have an aging parent, perhaps I have a challenging situation at home, what have you. Now that's going on in my life, and it's on now. I can decide whether I want to share it. A powerful question to ask is, okay, if I don't engage Dario in that conversation whatsoever, what are the impacts on my relationship? What are the impacts in terms of how I'm showing up? What the perceptions are? Now, it doesn't mean, to your point, that I have to share everything either. Now I can be more thoughtful around it. And I think one of the challenges that we can face, both as human beings as well as leaders, we tend to dichotomize situations. It's all in or it's nothing, right? Like we're going to change everything or we're not going to change anything. And, it'd be nice. We love that dichotomization, yet human existence is all around. It's a spectrum. So there's a wide range. And then different people can fall at different levels of that spectrum. Then I can say, okay, so then what am I able to share? And then what is the purpose of me sharing this information, and how do I want to communicate it? Because once again, I can decide to say, hey, Dario, like I recognize that I've been declining some of our meetings recently. I just want you to know there are some challenging things that are happening for me on my personal life. I really would prefer not to get into the specifics of those. I wanted you to know just if there are some things happening right now or in the future, you may see that I'm going to have to back out of a couple of meetings. I wanted you to know. And once again, I'm sharing, if you look at that curve, maybe it's at the 20% spectrum or what have you. Yet now for you, it provides some pretty valuable insight. And I think sometimes that also happens with us, is that we are concerned about the reaction on the other side, and we're not particularly good at setting boundaries, and which tends to lead us to be all in or nothing at all. And I think, and once again, to flip the question, because, and I've had some rich conversations in the CEO forums that I facilitate, is that if you dump everything on the other person and almost infer it's on them to deal with it and figure it out, then you can make a strong argument that, whoa, okay, like this, I appreciate this is going on in your world. Yet once again, if I throw it all on your side of the fence, then there's nothing on my side for my accountability there. So we want to be mindful of, every time we engage in a conversation or how we manage relationships, the impacts of those decisions.
So it's interesting. What you're saying makes lots of sense. And in other words, is life is complicated. This is realizing that there is a new way of looking at life, but it doesn't take all of those complexities away. You still have to, even more, you have to tune yourself to the different situation, to the different people, etc.
Absolutely. And I think, again, what's interesting, and I'll approach it through the lens of leadership as an example. Another rich conversation that I had was that, so as leaders, vulnerability as an example can feel like a scary subject. Like, are people going to lose confidence in me? Yet what research shows, and then anecdotal evidence shows, is that when leaders are vulnerable, when leaders are more authentic, people respect them more, and they're more engaged with them. They're more open with them, because they realize, hey, we're all human beings on this planet and on this journey together. And so what can happen is that I'm reluctant to share. Yet at the same time, as a leader, what we don't want to do is make it someone else's responsibility. So as an example, I show up to my team meeting and I go, I don't understand what's going on. All of this change. We've got all this technology coming in. I don't know how we're going to survive it. I just don't. And then you just put that on the table, which I've heard can happen in different organizations. And now what ends up happening is that the executive, the leader, comes across as being totally overwhelmed, absolutely beyond their scope. And now what's happening is that they're dumping all of that onto their team to figure it out versus coming in and saying, hello, everyone. Like, as you know, there's so much technological change we're grappling with within our organization, as well as with our customers, as well as in the world. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of things we don't know. We're doing our best to figure this out. And so here's one thing I know for sure. We're stronger together than we are separately. We have the expertise and the experience in this room to figure this out. What this means, though, is we need to lean into each other and have the most constructive conversations possible. We can't afford to be holding back, not sharing our ideas. We've got to come together and trust each other more than ever before in this environment. So you can, right, compare and contrast what those two meetings would look like and how that'll feel from a vulnerability perspective. In both circumstances, the leader is saying, I don't know, and I'm struggling with where we are. Yet in one situation, we're collectively going to figure this out. In the other, it's like, I'm just lost and I don't know what to do. But I wanted you to know. And good luck.
Well, I don't know if I'm understanding correctly, but that is I would use the term, comes from your first book, the Do Good to Lead Well, the Science and Practice of Positive Leadership. Is that the focus? The fact that you're leading by a positive example? Is it by putting a positive spin around things? I don't know. Do I get it right?
Well, I think what you want to do in situations is reinforce the idea that we have what it takes to deal with the challenge. Or if we don't have what it takes to deal with the challenge, what do we need to do? So how I would look at it is, are we putting ourselves and our teams in an empowering situation where we have choices that we can make, where we can take corrective action or we can take new action and generate ideas around it? Or is it going to be, look at all the bad things that are happening, the sky is falling, this is a disaster? Which of those two environments are we going to be more motivated? And as an example, research is abundantly clear that in more positive environments, we tend to be more innovative, more engaged, we perform at a higher level. We're drawn more to positive energy than to negative energy, and emotions are contagious. So we tend to catch each other's emotions. Now, one caveat I would put there is we want to ensure that our emotions are, and I'm so glad, Dario, you mentioned this earlier about being authentic. We want to ensure our emotions are authentic to the situation. Mm-hmm. So we're not coming in with what might be considered toxic positivity, as an example.
Yeah. Well, one of the sentences I've seen somewhere from you is bridging the gap between science, what science knows, and what leaders do. Where are we with that gap right now? Where is more evident? Because you seem to say we know that all of these things work. Are leaders not doing it or not doing it correctly?
Well, I think, and I have to credit, I'm forever grateful for Daniel Pink, multiple best-selling author and one of the highest rated TED Talks of all time. He graciously gave me permission to use that because I borrowed that from his best-selling book, Drive. And so his tagline was, want to bridge the gap between what science knows and what business does. And so I wanted to tweak it with leaders. I think now there's more and more research coming to the forefront. I feel like, and now the accessibility of that data and that information is more readily available. You have books coming out that are focusing on this. So now you have top academics, which before was mostly for academic journals and white papers and things like that were in university circles, now becoming much more widely prevalent. And so now academics are leading the charge. Adam Grant is a great example out of Wharton, one of the top-rated professors at Davos, who's written multiple best-selling books. has multiple TED Talks. So you have him and others, academics, leading that research-based charge. And I think now we're recognizing, well, evidence-informed decision-making is really vitally important. Yet, once again, back to our own biases, our own levels of self-awareness. If you're holding on to that old school leadership, hey, I don't need data to tell me what I know is right, and I'm just going to double down. Sometimes that can be, that is a ground for really challenging decisions. And so some people do hold on to, well, I'm in a leadership role for a reason. I was put there because I either am supremely intelligent or I've got an amazing amount of experience in these kinds of things that make sure I'm the best person in the room. And in fact, what is happening now is that the best leaders, they can't be the smartest person in the room anymore. It's virtually impossible to be as successful as you need to be because things are just moving too quickly. Too much information is out there.
Yes, so much so that probably we've heard even within the mobile ecosystem forum that businesses used to change every 25 years, 45 years ago. They then change every 10 years, 20 years ago. They change every 5 years today. So if a business changes so dramatically its business models, how can you always be the best person to know it all? But let's turn it around, and because you mentioned before, enlightened command and control model. Is there a reason sometimes to be the not so positive reminder of the things that are not done, that this is not acceptable, or that this is not the way you behave, etc., etc.? How do you deal when the leader might be a negative leader?
I'm so happy we're discussing this because this ends up being one of the most popular pushbacks and concerns and hesitations that people have. And your question nailed it around positive leadership. Oh, great. Basically got to throw performance conversations out the window. We have to accept lower standards. What is amazing is you can be tough on standards and sensitive on people. And that's the critical part. And once again, it comes back to one of the previous themes we were talking about, right? Dichotomy. I can either be nice or I can be results driven. The really powerful question, and that's what I love where a lot of the research is going, is we tend to ask either or. We tend to frame an either or. The power comes with the beauty of the and. How can I be nice and drive a high performance organization? They're not mutually exclusive. And so you can be empathetic and still drive exceptional performance. And in fact, data shows those two things come together. You can be humble and ambitious and decisive and confident. And so now in a conversation, you can say, hey, Dario, I want to have a discussion today about where we are in this project. So how do you think things are going? That's an empathetic question. Now the fear is, what if Dario says that I think this is awesome? This is the best project I've ever worked on. Well, I can ask, okay, what makes you say that? I've got all of the data and the information in the back of my mind that I can keep pulling out in the discussion. And the critical part is to show that I'm interested and I care and I'm curious about what's going on because maybe I don't have a good line of sight about what's occurring right now in this project. So now as you're sharing that information, I can say, well, okay, can you help me understand? I thought that this was due, yesterday, yet you're telling me it's 2 weeks' time. How is this? Where do you see this being on time? Now, let's say we get to a stage whereby in the conversation is, okay, this is not going in the direction we need. Well, now we can pivot and go, okay, well, where we are right now and where we need to be, there's a disconnect. So what do we need to do together to figure this out? What are those elements? And then a follow-up. Okay, since we are behind on this project, and we need to make some significant gains, what's going to happen? Tell me, how should we manage this if you aren't where you need to be in a week, 2 weeks, 3? Now we're co-creating. So we're not abandoning standards. We're very much making it a part of the conversation. And so this is the vitally important piece is, and this is where you can get disengagement. And in my coaching work, I find it all the time where an executive just demands a particular deadline that's unrealistic. And then the other person goes, they must know it's never going to happen. And so we'll just, move around. And so all kinds of slides and delays happen. This is the power, once again, of being empathetic, being curious, is co-creating, and you don't have to abandon standards for that.
It almost sounds like we're talking about changing the grammar, sometimes changing the vocabulary of what we are doing, but we're not necessarily changing the situation. We're not changing the fact that we're still a business, we're still running, and we still are going to have discussions and differences.
Well, and I'll go back to your point earlier too about being authentic. Well, right at the get-go of the project, let's figure out, so what's the timeline on this? What are the milestones we need to hit? What happens when we don't hit those milestones? What are the consequences for everybody around this table? That's, again, really powerful. And so what it minimizes is any potential missteps or misunderstandings later on by being authentic, having courageous conversations, and collaborative conversations early on.
Well, I'm sure it requires a certain amount of energy and possibly where it's all coming from. But I am now pointing out and another book of yours, which, by the way, you should probably take a note if you're listening, A Time to Lead, Mastering Yourself so you can master your world. I might probably, do I take it correctly that the self is where this energy, this is all starts. Congratulations on the book, which was released and did hit, number one on the Wall Street Journal and USA Today. So that, well done. And tell me, it definitely hit a note with so many people. How important is the self then?
I think it's vitally important. I think how can we lead others if we can't lead ourselves? If we have blind spots, and we are all, as human beings, we have blind spots. So if we aren't aware of what makes us tick, then how can we have the impact that we want in the world with the people around us, both professionally and personally? And leading from within is vitally important to leading without and to the outside. And if we can't get strong alignment on that, and I love how you bring it back to energy. If there are things going on inside of me, again, emotions that are happening it's really unsettling, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm disappointed. Well, if I'm not effectively processing those emotions, even backing up, if I'm not effectively identifying those emotions, if I'm not effectively processing those emotions, and if I'm not effectively acting on those emotions, well, then how am I going to be able to put myself in the position I need to be? That applies personally and professionally, with my family, with my colleagues at the office. Without that, we're really not able to tap into our attention, because what's happening? Those emotions are going to be distracting us. Those emotions are going to be depleting energy as opposed to providing energy. So our emotional inside world is the most vitally important energy engine that we have.
Your co-author there was Alan Mulally, the former CEO of Ford and Boeing. So it must have been full of real life examples. Can you share something from his experience or your experience about what can a leader do to manage his own self?
Well, and you're so right. Speaking with Alan Mulally, the legendary former CEO of Ford and one of the most highly respected CEOs of all time. And he took over Ford when their stock price was about $1. And then when he left, it was over $18. So it was a remarkable turnaround. And it really came from him. And a couple of things which I think are amazing for Alan. So many things. One is at the center of his working together management system. So again, so many amazing insights about how we can most effectively work together is the foundational piece. He calls it people first, love them up. And there's a heart. And so you think about, once again, a lot of different individuals will go, okay, so Ford Motor Company, global, right? Fortune 100, just, is there any
Engineering
room?
company. Exactly.
Exactly. Is there any room for love there? And for him, that was in the middle of his working together management system. And so for him, that was the foundational piece. You could never make a personal attack. That was an absolute no-no. You could have vigorous debates about ideas. You could challenge each other. Never make a joke at someone else's expense. Never have a personal attack. You couldn't come after me for my education, whatever it is. Like, you leave the person outside of the conversation. Talk about our ideas all the time. And so I think that was, for him, incredibly powerful. When people left the organization, he would say, we love you and you don't have a place here. And so just because you're not a part of what we do doesn't mean we don't love you anymore, and we don't want what's best for you. The other thing I think was so amazing about Alan was it was just radical transparency. And so he had a system, and so many organizations have adopted this, the green, yellow, red check-in for projects. Green, all systems go. Yellow, well, things are a little wobbly and we're not sure, but we think we know what changes we need to make. And red, beep, 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 we have no idea, 911. Whenever his executives would show up with reds, he would call them gems. And I think it was genius. You were talking about earlier, shifting the language. A red, basically, in most organizations is crisis, like who's to blame, let's yell at someone. For him, it was a gem because he realized this is a significant business risk that someone had the courage to raise it. And now we as a senior leadership team have a responsibility to figure it out together. And what I love about when he came into Ford in one of his first meetings, everybody green, green, green across all the charts. And they were losing an unbelievable amount of money at the time. And I remember him sharing with me, he was like, what happens when things are really bad if we're all green and this is a horrible business context? And then when someone had the courage to put a red on their update, all their, the colleagues there are like, well, good to know you, Craig. Goodbye. You no longer have a career at Ford. And I love what Alan did. He shared, when that went up on the screen, everyone thought two large security people would come in through the iron doors and toss the person out. That's it. Goodbye. What did he do? He applauded in front of the whole senior leadership team and said, this is exactly the level of courage and transparency we need in order to turn this organization around. And then move this executive closer to him to show how important and how powerful those steps were. And not surprisingly, more and more reds showed up. And now what they were able to do is talk about these risks collectively and figure it out. It's a genius decision and action that was taken. And imagine how that may have played out in other organizations and even in Ford itself before Alan took over. That was just a no-no. It was all good news all day long, toxic positivity, sharing lots of happy faces, green, 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 yet underneath the surface, the house is on fire.
Well, wow, it looks like we could stay here easily another half hour with all of those examples. I mean, that was great. And if you are interested, if you're listening right now, do know, as mentioned before, that Craig has got his own podcast. In fact, I will ask more, in terms of hints how to manage, given how successful he is. The podcast is called Do Good to Lead Well. And on top of your coaching session as well. Unfortunately, it might be all we have time for. But Craig, that was absolutely great. I wish we could all start doing something today on that. What would your, micro suggestions? What's the first step to become a positive leader?
Well, I love that you ended with this question because this is an idea I've been playing around with more recently. I think for leaders today and for all of us today, the most important thing we can do is raise our level of awareness. We need to be a chief awareness officer. And so that's awareness of self and awareness of others. And what I would say for people listening is the very first thing we want to do is be curious. When we're in situations with other people or other situations, we want to learn. So if I'm feeling something, if I'm having a reaction, be curious. So rather than dismiss our emotions, learn from them. Look at our emotions as data points and as mysteries to be solved. And what can we learn? What are they trying to communicate to us so that we can continue to grow as human beings and as leaders? And the other thing I would add to that, so maybe even cheating a little bit to add an extra piece to it, is that the more we feel our reaction is irrational in a situation, be more versus less curious. Because sometimes a lot of my clients will say to me, well, I shouldn't feel that way. This really, how I'm reacting how could I feel that in this situation? It doesn't make any sense. And then I'll say, well, rather than dismiss it, be more curious. So what is it that happened? What made you have that reaction that you're recognizing is out of bounds?
So be aware, be curious. We like that. We'll finish with that. If not, just to say thanks again to Craig Dowden for joining us today. You will find him as an author, as a podcast author, as a coach out there. Thanks, Craig, again, and I hope we'll speak soon.
Thanks for listening to Perspectives in Mobile. This episode was part of a 6-part series on managing change in the digital era, supported by Netnumber, the source of high-quality data on phone number portability, fraud prevention data, and signaling and routing control. Stay tuned, stay connected, and join us next for more insights and discussions.